And here we go. We've got visual, we've got audio, everything's green, no frames dropped, so we've got a stream. All right, guys, I am Aesop Grimm. Welcome to the channel. This is episode number 4 of going over C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. We just wrapped up the first chapter, Men Without Chest. We're about to start chapter 2 or lecture number 2. Remember, these are all transcriptions of lectures that he gave at Durham University in 1943. But as I typically do, we're going to go over a bit of a summary from what we went over last time. And this time it was a little bit hard for me. I found myself wanting to highlight everything. So I'm not going to highlight I'm not going to summarize the whole chapter this time around. I'm just going to go over what we were covering in the last episode a little bit, because there's enough highlights here to take care of that. And once we're done with that summary, right before jumping into lecture number 2, The Way, I will turn off YouTube and Twitch. And if you want to continue following along, you will need to go look me up under the same name, Aesop Grimm, on Rumble or Kick. Okay, well, with that said, let's go ahead and do the summary. So recall that C.S. Lewis is critiquing why the authors of the Green Book are approaching things in the wrong way and what the implications thereof are. So he goes on to say, the very possibility of a sentiment being reasonable or even unreasonable has been excluded from the outset if you were to take Gaius and Titius's approach to things. Remember, Gaius and Titius are saying that someone expressing an emotion doesn't actually have any value, or someone making an assessment, a value assessment on an object, what they're really doing is they're just conveying their emotion about that object, and therefore it's null and void. It's not really meaningful to anybody but them. That seems to be their approach, and C.S. Lewis is reacting against that. And recall also that the baseline philosophical argument that is occurring at this time and that C.S. Lewis has taken up the challenge on is subjectivism versus objectivism. Modern day, we would call this postmodern, or we would say things like "speak your truth." There are people out there challenging whether there can be objective value. A lot of these people say it's a figment of your imagination, it's a mental construct, those kinds of things, and that there's no real such thing, no actual, honest to God, singular truth about anything. It's all subjective. And C.S. Lewis kicks back against this really hard through a few different arguments, and this is what he's responding to here as well. He believes that Gaius and Titius are perhaps unwittingly succumbing to this theory of subjectivism, which C.S. Lewis believes is absolute poison for society. So there. Now that I've given that, let's read it again. The very possibility of a sentiment being reasonable or even unreasonable has been excluded from the outset. And then he explains why. It can be reasonable or unreasonable only if it conforms or fails to conform to something else. To say that the cataract is sublime means saying that our emotion of humility is appropriate or ordinate to the reality, and thus to speak of something else besides the emotion, just as to say that a shoe fits is to speak not only of shoes but of feet. And this is what Gaius and Titius are ruling out. They're saying that it's not possible for you to be weighing in on the actual value of the cataract. Is that what he calls it? Cataract? Cataphract? Cataract, yeah. They're saying that's just how you feel about it, right? Okay, C.S. Lewis goes on then. He says, on this view, the world of facts, without one trace of value, and the world of feelings, without one trace of truth or falsehood, justice or injustice, confront one another, and no rapprochement is possible. And recall, I had to look up rapprochement to see what it meant, and it meant reconciliation between two things. So he's saying that the world of facts cannot be reconciled with the world of feelings or truth. which is a problem, right? Because both are part of reality. So you don't want to exclude either one. You want those two to actually be supporting one another. And that might be, if you were to study epistemology, the study of how we know what is truth, I'm sure you would. I've never studied it professionally or like scholastically, so I don't know, but I'm guessing you would find that having proofs from both sides of these, you have facts, you have reality, you have truth, uh, you know, or a claim of truth, and that if all of those things line up and prove true, you have a good solid argument, right? Okay, moving on. Those he talks here about being inside within the Tao or without the Tao. He says those outside of the Tao. He says without, but I'm translating it. Those outside of the Tao, if they are logical, must regard all sentiments as equally non-rational, as mere mists between us and the real objects. And they must either decide to remove all sentiments as far as possible from the pupil's mind, or else to encourage some sentiments for reasons that have nothing to do with their intrinsic justness, or ordinacy. Now, this right here, the reason I highlighted this is because he's going to kind of expand. This is a central idea right here. So let's get it again. It's the second part. Or else to encourage some sentiments for reasons that have nothing to do with their intrinsic justness or ordinacy. Why do they have nothing to do with intrinsic justness or ordinacy? Because the theory that Gaius and Titius are putting forth say it's not possible. It says that it's just simply your own emotional view, and they're discounting it, right? And he says that second part, if that's the view that's taken up, the consequence of it is that it forces the questionable process of creating in others by suggestion or incantation a mirage which their own reason has successfully dissipated. Well, really? I mean, really, C.S. Lewis, how do you, that's a pretty blanket statement. Is that what it's going to apply to everything? How can you justify that? So he goes on and he gives an example. He says, when a Roman father told his son that it was a sweet and seemly thing to die for his country, he believed what he said. He was communicating to the son an emotion which he himself shared and which he believed to be in accord with the value which his judgment discerned in noble death. But Gaius and Titius, so not just any death, but the Roman father is saying a noble death would consist of things such as this. If this is what you're dying for, you can count as a noble death, and it served a greater cause, right? That's what C.S. Lewis is trying to get across. But it goes on and says, but Gaius and Titius cannot believe that in calling such a death sweet and seemly, they would be saying that Roman father would be saying something important about something. Now, he used that in quotes because that's what Gaius and that's their own words. We believe we are saying something important about something, but really we're only talking about our own emotion and how we feel about that is what that was at the beginning of this chapter. If we move on down, it says, where the old initiated, the new merely conditions. Now, this is important because in the final chapter, which is where all the good stuff is at, that's the whole point of this series of speeches that C.S. Lewis gave. He's going to talk about the conditioned and the conditioner, and of all the stuff in these speeches that applies to our current context, that one is the most out loud bang, shotgun to the face, like holy smokes, we're being automatized, we're being propagandized, we're being turned into robots. It's the conditioned and the conditioner. So he says, where the old methods initiated, the new merely conditions. And he goes, in a word, the old was a kind of propagation, the old way of teaching. He's talking about classical learning. The old was a kind of propagation. In other words, if you've ever heard the phrase passing on the torch, you're taking the values and sentiments that you've learned over a long life and you're handing it on to a new generation so that they don't have to learn it the hard way, right? And they can continue to carry the torch because now you're at the end of your life. You can't go do the heavy lifting. They're the ones that are having to push society forward. So you hand to them everything that you learned and everything that was passed on to you. That's propagation. right? So he's saying, in a word, the old method of teaching, classical learning, was a kind of propagation, men transmitting manhood to men. The new is merely propaganda. It is to their credit that Gaius and Titius embraced the first alternative. Okay, so he says Gaius and Titius are not trying to propagandize here. And he says they probably have some vague notion that valor and good faith and justice could be sufficiently commended to the pupil on what they would call rational or biological or modern grounds if it should ever become necessary. And what I'm telling you is that if you want to really understand more about this, because it applies to our modern society as well, this is a take on the utilitarian society. This, I talked about it a little bit in the last episode from an example I had heard an atheist use about how atheists have to create kind of a false belief system in their own head. And he used an example of a two-story house. On the ground floor was what atheists believe, that in naturalism, nothing really means anything. From dirt you came, from dirt you're going to return. You have this life, and when it's done, and you just go right back into the system of nature, and your body decomposes and you feed new life, right? But under that pretense, then, what kind of motivation do you have to be good, virtuous, or noble? To think of others before yourself. And the atheistic answer, to my knowledge, the rebuttal there is, well, because it's for the greater good. It's what is known as the greater good argument. But the greater good argument falls in on itself. I can't remember exactly how it does, but it's out there on YouTube. You can look it up. Now, I'm not trying to pick on atheism here. I'm trying to talk about the utilitarian society. The utilitarian society says that you do the good, the noble, and the virtuous because it's for the greater good. And therefore, your purpose as a human being within a society, it reduces you to being a cog. You have to do these things because it's good for the whole, right? And it begins to fail when you start talking about things like war. And why should these people go and those people not go? And things of that nature. So I don't know enough about it to really give a good, solid breakdown. It's out there. You can find it really easily. It's all over the place. But I am informing you that C.S. Lewis is looking at it from this perspective. I can tell from his language and from what I know of his background and what he was for and what he was against. So the valor and good faith and justice could be sufficiently commended to the pupil on what they would call rational or biological or modern grounds if it should ever become necessary. He's saying that would be Gaius and Titius' argument in all likelihood. And then C.S. Lewis goes on to say, but this course is not less disastrous than the opposite alternative of cynical propaganda. And he breaks it down. He says, let us suppose for a moment that the harder virtues could really be theoretically justified with no appeal to objective value. In other words, why should I go to war to defend this nation? If you're asking a utilitarian that, their response would be, well, for the greater good. Well, what greater good? I don't know. I don't want to get too much into it because I think I could mess it up. But a person that was appealing to objective value that could show you that defending your nation and its interests is a noble thing that you've embraced. It's a sentiment that's been ingrained in you and passed on through the ages. That's appealing to objective value. No, it's not. I just said sentiment. See, that's what I mean. I would mess it up. You can tell I don't have it completely clear in my head. I've gone over it before. I've seen the debates. I've even gone to debates and listened to people discuss this. I've read the books, but it's been a while. And so it's kind of a train wreck in my head. So I apologize. So let's just go on and just read what C.S. Lewis said. He says, but this course is not less disastrous than the opposite alternative of cynical propaganda. Let us suppose for a moment that the harder virtues could really be theoretically justified with no appeal to objective value. No justification of virtue will enable a man to be virtuous. That makes sense to me. Just because you can justify it, that's like a legal theory. Like I can sit here and I can show you logically this is why virtue would be justified, but it doesn't inspire you to be virtuous. It doesn't inspire you to put your life on the line, right? Without the aid of trained emotions, the intellect is powerless against the animal organism. And he goes, in battle, it is not syllogisms that will keep the reluctant nerves and muscles to their post in the third hour of the bombardment. The crudest sentimentalism about a flag or a country or a regiment will be of more use. We were told it long ago by Plato, as the king governs by his executive, so reason and man must rule the mere appetites by means of the spirited element. Okay, so I thought that was important. He goes on to expand, but so reason and man must rule the mere appetites by means of the spirited element. So it's not just the brain and pure logic, and it's the brain through the spirit that must govern the animal appetites in order to separate you as a human being from the law of the jungle. And he goes on to say, the head rules the belly through the chest. The seat, as Alanis tells us, of magnanimity, of emotions, organized. So he's saying this about the chest. The head rules the belly through the chest. And then what is the chest? There's a dash here, like a double dash. And it says the seat, as Alanis tells us, of magnanimity, of emotions organized by trained habit into stable sentiments. The chest, magnanimity, sentiment. These are the indispensable liaison officers between cerebral man and visceral man. It may even be said that it is by this middle element, the chest, that man is man, for by his intellect he is mere spirit, and by his appetite mere animal. Okay, now the entire final paragraph of this section called Men Without Chest is worth reading. So we're going to skip over one paragraph, and I'm going to read the very last paragraph in its entirety. It's actually pretty short. It says, and all the time, such is the tragicomedy of our situation. We continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive, or dynamism, or self-sacrifice, or creativity. Remember that this is 1943. They're in the midst of World War II. It's been a hard, long war against Fortress Europe and the forces of Nazi Germany. A lot of British people have paid the price, way more than America, and we paid a pretty heavy price, but we were late to that game. The Brits were in it from day one. And so the price that they've paid, think about the impact on just simply continuing their civilization through a required minimal birth rate level. A lot of the young men have died. You got young women at home just graduating out of high school who have survived bombings on London and are now looking for a husband, and the guys that they have to pick from are the ones that weren't fit to go to work because they were too old, right? The guys that are more their age are coming home completely shattered, physically, psychologically, emotionally. This is a really, really difficult time for England, for the UK. Right? So let's read that again now that I've refreshed your mind on what their current cultural climate is like. And all the time, such is the tragicomedy of our situation, we continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs. Why are they saying this? Because they're near the breaking point. It's been a long, hard road, and they're very close to being completely broken. What our civilization needs is more drive, or dynamism, or self-sacrifice, or creativity. Why is it saying we need more of this? Because the society is getting so exhausted and tired that people are they don't want to give more. They don't have any more to give. How much blood can you squeeze out of a stone? You know, they're done. They're finished. They're near exhaustion. And then C.S. Lewis goes on to say, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. I mean, that's when you start thinking of what life was like at that time, what the nation must have felt like as a whole. From north to south, east to west, wherever you went in that country, there would be a dark cloud hanging over it because they've been fighting this war for so long. And this is how they feel. And they're trying to find answers, and they're going about it. And what C.S. Lewis is saying, this approach isn't going to work. And he's showing why. So I thought that was real important to point out. I had a history professor that told our class that history is the greatest parallel to a laboratory that we have when it comes to learning about mankind and how we think and how societies work. Science can do a laboratory and they can set up experiments and they can design it top to bottom, A to Z, put in whatever variables they want to, keep things as stable as they want, and run all the tests that they want. How do you do that for society and human beings? And my history professor said that studying history was the closest thing that you could get to that. You could look at other societies that, there's some truth to the old biblical phrase, there's nothing new under the sun. You can go look at other societies. You can look at their context, their surrounding context, and you can read what they had to say about what they were facing and the decisions that they made. And then you can look at what the results were, and you can extrapolate answers that are relevant to your own period by doing that. But it's a lot of work and it's not exact, right? So, all right, we're going to be moving on to the way, where it opens up with one of the Analects of Confucius. It says, "It is upon the trunk that a gentleman works." Oh, that's interesting. It is upon the trunk that a gentleman works. I guess the trunk would be the core component. So maybe don't get lost in the weeds. I'm not sure. I'd have to see what else Confucius had to say on that. But anyway, we're going to turn YouTube and Twitch off. Let me flip this over to the Be Right Back screen. Bum, 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 bum. There it is. And you can see up at the top left is I believe the top left is my Rumble web address. And top right is the one for Kick. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of time to move over to that. We're already coming up on 30 minutes. Okay, I am searching for destinations. I'm going to turn YouTube and Twitch off right now.